Hello, Year 4. So good to be seeing you again. We have reached the last lesson of this series of lessons. Let's just step back. Let's take a look at what we've done because we've covered so much this half term. It's been incredible, really, to see how you've responded to it. So, first off, we said, what was conscience? Conscience was the voice in our head that tells us what right and wrong is and how to make moral decisions. And then we looked at different places we might get conscience from family, from religion, from school, from friends. We then looked at a man called Augustine, and he said that conscience was the voice of God in our heads. And if we just listened to that voice, we would always do the right thing because God was perfectly good, and if God was talking to us through our conscience, then we would be perfectly good. Then we looked at another man called Thomas Aquinas. Some just call him Aquinas, really. And Aquinas said, actually, Augustine was wrong, that yes, God did speak to us because he was a Christian as well, but it wasn't as simple as to just say that it was the voice of God, that we needed to use our reason, that's our thinking, we needed to use the Bible, and then we could hear what God had to say, and then we could make the right decisions. Then we looked at the Bible itself and we said actually lots of the Bible contradicts each other. So it's two things that don't match up in different parts of the Bible because it was written by lots of different people over a long period of time. And we said, well, Christians, just like Aquinas says, have to use their reason, they have to use their thinking skills to work out what they should learn from the Bible. And then we sort of finished looking at Christians, and last lesson we said, how do people who are atheist, which means they have no belief in God, or agnostic, which means they're not sure whether God exists, how do they make moral decisions? And one group of those people that we looked at were humanists, who said that they use common sense, said that they tried to do things that were in the interests of everyone. And that's one way of doing it. And then today we're going to look at a different group of people who generally tend to be atheists and agnostics, and those people are called hedonists. And we're going to say, how do hedonists make moral decisions? Because it's quite different. So let's take a look. Okay, so far we've looked at Augustine and Aquinas and humanists on how they make moral decisions. And we've looked at how the Bible can be quite a tricky place to go for help. And today we're going to look at another way of making moral decisions, hedonism. Now some people say it hedonism, so either is fine, but hedonism. Hedonism. And hedonism comes from the Latin word for pleasure, so it's about seeking pleasure. Hedonism means using pleasure and pain as guides to making moral decisions. Hedonists say if you want to know the right thing to do, you need to ask, how much pain does it cause? And how much pleasure does it cause? So let's take a simple example, okay? Should I push someone in a puddle? Well, how much pain does that cause? Quite a lot for the person who's being pushed in the puddle, I would have thought. But how much pleasure does it cause? Well, if you were a nasty person, you might feel some pleasure at watching someone be pushed into a puddle. But it's unlikely that if we're thinking about scales and balancing again, the pain caused is going to be greater than the pleasure created. And so a hedonist would say you have to do the thing which causes the most pleasure and the least pain. So in that case, don't push someone in the puddle. Now it gets a lot more complicated when you start to think of lots of people, or if you start to think about whether people are good people or bad people, how you would even go about measuring pleasure or pain. But for now, the important thing to know is that hedonists say that you need to ask how much pain does it cause and how much pleasure does it cause. Okay, and this chap here, this is a guy called Jeremy Bentham. And Jeremy Bentham was a famous philosopher and ethicist. Remember we used this word ethics to say this was the study of what was right and wrong. And Jeremy Bentham studied ethics and decided hedonism was the best way to work out what the right thing to do is. So he says, and this is a quote from one of his books, he says, create all the pleasure you are able to create, remove the pain you are able to remove. And it says here, this might seem like a really good idea, but can you think of any problems with it? Okay, have a think. Okay, at the bottom of your booklet page here, we've got a spider diagram that says problems with hedonism. So let's have a try at filling out some of these problems. What kind of issues can we think? Well, I've sort of said one already. It's really hard to measure pleasure and pain. I mean, you know, how much pleasure is equal to being slapped around the face? How much pain is equal to the pleasure of eating a Happy Meal? When does that pain and pleasure take place? I might want to eat 400 double cheeseburgers tomorrow, but then the day after, I'm going to be in a lot of pain because of that. So, and maybe in 20 years' time, I'll die young because of how many cheeseburgers I ate. I mean, it's so hard to measure pleasure and pain. So that's one problem. Another problem is that not everyone has the same idea of pleasure and pain. So, for example, you know, I chew my fingernails, which is a really bad habit. But when I do that, that's kind of pleasurable for me, even though it causes a little bit of pain. But for another person, that would just be pain. So, how am I supposed to make moral decisions where other people are involved based on my own ideas of pleasure and pain? It's really, really, really difficult. And is it always right to cause anyone pain if it creates enough pleasure? So would it be right to push someone into a puddle if it was being filmed and it got put on YouTube and got 1 million hits and 1 million people found it funny? That probably would be more pleasure than the pain caused. But does it make it right? Is it the right thing to do? Is it the moral thing to do? Is it the right moral decision to make? So it's too simple is the first problem. It's really difficult to measure is the second problem. And the third problem is whose pain and whose pleasure is important. So those are some issues with hedonism. And then we've got the case of the cake. So before we read this slide, let's talk about this question here. It says, how would a hedonist go about making the decision of whether to share their birthday cake? I've got my big birthday cake. Remember, I need to decide whether I'm going to eat it myself or share it with the class. Well, eating it myself would create a lot of pleasure, I can tell you that. And it wouldn't really create any pain because, you know, you don't even know that I've got a birthday cake in the staff room ready to be eaten, do you? I'm not going to tell you about it. So that's one way of looking at it. But if I shared out the cake, I would create pleasure for all 20 people in my class. So that would be brilliant. That would be lots of pleasure for lots of people. So I think even a hedonist would say we should probably share the cake, but they would have to weigh up how much pleasure was being created. And would I feel a lot of pain at having to share my cake? Okay. So, and these are more problems. These are the problems that we were thinking about a second ago. What if your pleasure causes someone else pain? How can we know what will cause pleasure and pain before we act? We might think that, you know, I don't know, making someone a lovely cup of tea would be great, but what if they burn their mouth on it? You know, how are we going to predict what causes pleasure and pain? What if causing someone pain gives someone a lot of pleasure? That's what we were talking about, the person being pushed in the puddle. And how do we measure pleasure and pain? So those are the problems of this. But it is an interesting theory. It's interesting to think that we can have something so simple as to just say we want to reduce the amount of pain and increase the amount of pleasure. That'd be a really simple way to go about making moral decisions. So I hope you've enjoyed this half term. That's the last theory that we're going to look at. You are quite incredible to have looked at Augustine, Aquinas, the Bible, humanists, and Jeremy Bentham over the course of the last 6 lessons. That's really impressive. I hope you've enjoyed it. Send in any questions or queries that you have. Anything I can help make clear or clarify for you, I'd absolutely love to do it. I hope you have a wonderful summer. I'm not sure if this is the last lesson I'll do for you. We'll see how things go. But I hope you have a wonderful summer, and I shall see you in September, fresh and bright and smiling year 5s. I can't believe you're going to be in year 5. Amazing. I'll see you in the summer. Have a great one. Bye bye, guys.